The sea off Naples is bubbling violently right now, and scientists are absolutely terrified because what they are seeing beneath the water is not just unusual volcanic activity. It is a geological monster waking up after nearly 500 years of sleep. Picture 500,000 people living their daily lives directly above one of the most dangerous volcanic systems on Earth. Fishermen are watching their boats get pushed sideways by underwater gas explosions. The ocean itself is starting to boil as something massive rises from the depths below. Families go to bed each night not knowing if the ground will still be there in the morning. This is not just bubbles rising through calm water. This is nature's final warning before a system that created an entire mountain in just 1 week decides to explode again. But here is what has scientists in absolute panic. Every single warning sign from the 1538 eruption is happening again right now, in the exact same sequence, only stronger. The bubbles, the earthquakes, the rising ground, the chemical signals, all of it pointing toward the same terrifying conclusion. Are we watching Naples sit on top of a volcano that is about to erupt? Or is there still time to evacuate 500,000 people before the bay explodes? March 2024. The first bubble clusters erupt through the Bay of Naples on a calm Tuesday morning, and local fishermen who have spent their entire lives reading these waters immediately know something is catastrophically wrong. The bubbles are not random. They form in tight, violent clusters that appear and vanish within minutes, like the sea itself is gasping for breath. The water around them shifts from clear Mediterranean blue to a cloudy, sickly green before darkening completely as sediments boil upward from the seafloor below. Boats anchored in the area report faint but repetitive vibrations rumbling through their hulls, like a distant engine revving beneath the waves. This is not normal. This is not seasonal gas release. This is something far more terrifying beginning to stir. Local authorities in Pozzuoli initially dismissed the reports as harmless biological activity or routine volcanic venting, but marine technicians deployed to investigate the phenomenon discover data that immediately escalates the situation to emergency status. Carbon dioxide levels have spiked to concentrations far above normal baseline readings. Newly opened seafloor vents are releasing sulfur-rich gases at rates that increase by the hour. Temperature probes lowered into the bay detect subtle but consistent warming spreading across sections of the ocean floor that should be cold and stable. These are not surface disturbances caused by currents or seasonal shifts. These are the earliest visible symptoms of massive pressure rising deep beneath Naples, forcing its way toward the surface through cracks in the Earth's crust. The geographic reality makes the discovery exponentially more terrifying. The Bay of Naples sits directly above Campi Flegrei, one of the most dangerous volcanic systems anywhere on the planet. Over 500,000 people live within the caldera rim, going about their daily lives on top of a geological time bomb. The last major eruption here occurred in 1538, an explosive event that created an entire new mountain called Monte Novo in just 1 week of violent activity. The bubbles breaking through the calm surface today are not just unusual. They are the first warning that the giant beneath Naples might be waking up again after nearly 500 years of silence. Across Pozzuoli and parts of Naples, GPS monitoring stations begin recording a movement pattern that scientists have been praying they would never detect again. Rapid synchronized ground uplift. What had been slow, almost gentle bradycism for months suddenly accelerates into something far more aggressive and dangerous. Between April 15th and May 3rd, 2024, entire neighborhoods shift upward by 4.2 centimeters, a measurement that sounds small until you realize it represents millions of tons of rock being forced toward the sky by pressure building beneath the city. Sidewalks develop fresh fractures that spread across concrete like spiderwebs overnight. Pavements tilt slightly but noticeably toward the sea, creating drainage problems that civil engineers cannot explain through normal subsidence patterns. Residents across the affected zones report details that sound minor, but reveal something catastrophic happening beneath their feet. Doors that closed perfectly for years suddenly jam in their frames. Windows stick and refuse to open. Building foundations shift just enough to create gaps where walls meet floors. These are small but unmistakable signs that the land itself is warping, bending upward under forces that have not been active in this region for decades. Civil engineers dispatched to inspect older structures find subtle deformations spreading through foundations and support beams, stress fractures appearing in buildings that have stood solid for centuries. In some coastal areas, drainage systems that have functioned properly for generations suddenly reverse flow as the terrain tilts upward at angles steep enough to redirect water back toward its source. Even the shoreline begins betraying the underground chaos. The waterline creeps visibly higher along the Pozzuoli coast, exposing rocks and ancient stone steps that have been submerged beneath the bay for as long as anyone can remember. But the uplift is not random or evenly distributed. Satellite interferometry data reveals the terrifying truth. A broad dome is forming directly beneath the most active and densely populated part of the Campi Flegrei system. Something deep underground is expanding with increasing force. Gas, magma, or a nightmarish combination of both is pushing the entire region upward like a slow, immensely powerful breath that refuses to stop. As the ground continues rising faster, gas monitoring stations positioned across the Campi Flegrei caldera light up with readings that emergency response teams have hoped never to witness. Overnight, carbon dioxide concentrations shoot to levels 400% above normal baseline, climbing so rapidly that automated alert systems trigger evacuation warnings at monitoring posts near the Solfatara crater. Helium-3, a rare isotope that only rises through volcanic vents when magma approaches dangerously close to the surface, spikes sharply across multiple measurement sites. Sulfur dioxide surges as well, a classic and unmistakable sign that superheated fluids deep underground are forcing their way upward through widening fractures in the Earth's crust. These gases are not drifting out slowly in the harmless patterns typical of dormant volcanic systems. They are venting with violent force, rising through expanding cracks beneath Pozzuoli, the Solfatara crater, and sections of the Bay of Naples that have remained geologically quiet for centuries. Thermal cameras deployed by emergency response teams capture glowing plumes of vapor erupting from vents where absolutely nothing existed just days earlier. Some emission points are releasing gas concentrations so intense that vegetation within a 50-meter radius turns yellow and brittle within hours, killed by sulfur levels toxic enough to burn living tissue. Researchers working for Italy's National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology quickly compare the chemical signatures pouring from these vents with historical data archived from past eruptions, and the pattern they discover is both unmistakable and absolutely terrifying. The current gas mixture matches conditions recorded in the months leading up to the 1538 Monte Novo eruption almost exactly, the explosive event that reshaped this entire region and killed dozens of people in catastrophic pyroclastic flows. But the readings coming through monitoring equipment right now are measuring even stronger than the 1538 baseline. Emergency teams scramble to install new portable gas detectors around schools, shipping ports, and densely packed residential blocks throughout Pozzuoli and Naples. The immediate worry is not just that emission levels are rising. It is the rate of week-over-week acceleration, numbers climbing so fast they suggest underground pressure building rapidly toward a critical threshold where containment becomes impossible. Thermal drone flights launched over the Bay of Naples in late April reveal something that immediately escalates the crisis to a new level of danger. Broad patches of the seafloor are warming rapidly, glowing bright orange and red in infrared imaging, where the water should register as cold and stable. At first, the thermal signatures are limited to a small cluster of hotspots concentrated near the Pozzuoli coastline. Within just 4 days, that initial zone widens into a sprawling network of glowing streaks, spreading beneath the waves like veins of fire, branching across the ocean floor. Underwater temperature sensors lowered into the affected areas confirm what the thermal cameras are detecting from above. Seafloor temperatures have risen by several degrees Celsius in a matter of weeks, climbing far too fast to be explained by normal geothermal background activity. The ocean surface above the most active vents begins shimmering visibly, distorting like heat waves rising off summer asphalt, the water itself reacting to the inferno building beneath. Microvents multiply across the seafloor, each one releasing constant streams of superheated gas that make entire sections of the bay appear to simmer and boil. Some stretches produce such violent bubble columns that small fishing boats caught in the thermal zones report being pushed sideways by the force of gas erupting from below. Local fishermen who have worked these waters for over 40 years describe conditions they have never witnessed before. The sea is not behaving like water anymore. It is behaving like a pot approaching full boil. Marine biologists monitoring the ecosystem document fish species abandoning their traditional feeding grounds in massive numbers, fleeing toward cooler water as thermal plumes rise from the seafloor and warp underwater visibility to near zero. Divers attempting to investigate the vents report temperature readings 15 to 20 degrees Celsius above the surrounding water, measurements that indicate boiling conditions exist just meters below the surface. The pattern emerging from the data is undeniable and catastrophic. A massive body of pressurized heat is moving upward beneath the crust, creeping closer to the surface and releasing energy through every geological weakness it can find. If the heat front continues expanding at this rate, it could destabilize the entire seabed structure, creating perfect conditions for violent steam-driven hydrothermal explosions that could detonate without warning. As gas emissions intensify and seafloor heating spreads, the ground responds with a seismic rhythm that sends terror through every neighborhood built on top of the caldera. Clusters of shallow earthquakes begin striking Naples, Pozzuoli, and the surrounding coastal towns, sometimes registering dozens of separate tremors within a single hour. These are not the deep tectonic quakes associated with normal plate boundary activity. These shocks are occurring just a few hundred meters below the surface, the exact depth where pressurized magma and superheated fluids fracture solid rock as they force their way upward through weakening crust. The seismic data pouring into monitoring stations is staggering and accelerating. More than 135 separate earthquake events were recorded in just the past week alone. February 2024 logged around 2,000 individual tremors in a single month, a frequency that shatters every baseline measurement for normal background seismicity in this region. Residents living directly above the most active zones report experiences that transform daily life into a waking nightmare. Windows rattle repeatedly through the night, vibrating so violently that glass cracks in older frames. Shop owners arrive at their businesses each morning to find fresh fractures running across walls that were solid the day before. Schools across Pozzuoli evacuate children multiple times per week, as tremors intensify during classroom hours, teachers struggling to maintain calm while the ground shakes beneath their feet. Seismologists reviewing the earthquake waveforms notice a progression that matches historical patterns with terrifying precision. The quakes are becoming progressively shallower, sharper in their seismic signatures, and migrating geographically toward the areas directly above the most active gas emission fields. This is not random shaking caused by faraway tectonic stress. This is the crust actively deforming and fracturing under rising internal pressure that refuses to stabilize. The last time Campi Flegrei produced this exact seismic pattern, the 1538 Monte Novo eruption followed within days, not months or years. Civil protection officials quietly elevate monitoring protocols to crisis status, dispatching structural engineering teams to inspect schools, bridges, hospitals, and critical infrastructure for stress damage that could turn deadly during evacuation scenarios. Every tremor that rumbles through the streets carries the same inescapable message. The volcanic system buried beneath 500,000 people is tightening like a clenched fist, and the pressure shows no signs of releasing safely. High-resolution radar imaging and GPS deformation data deliver the most alarming discovery yet, a finding that transforms scientific concern into outright panic among volcanologists monitoring the Campi Flegrei system. The deep magma chamber buried beneath Pozzuoli in Naples is expanding, moving slowly at first through the spring months, then accelerating with measurable speed as pressure builds from below. Advanced instruments detect molten rock actively melting its way upward through overlying geological layers, softening the brittle crust above and creating entirely new pathways for superheated gas and magma to rise toward the surface. This is not the long, stable chamber that scientists have monitored peacefully for decades. Its internal pressure dynamics have fundamentally shifted, and geophysical models strongly suggest new magma is being injected into the reservoir from sources even deeper within the Earth's mantle. As the expanding reservoir pushes upward against the crust, computer simulations indicate catastrophically increasing stress loading onto brittle rock layers that have already been weakened and fractured by years of continuous uplift and relentless seismic activity. Geophysicists compare current pressure readings to historical records preserved from past eruptive phases, and the similarities to conditions documented before the 1538 Monte Novo eruption are impossible to ignore. But the affected area this time is far larger in geographic scope, and the rate of pressure accumulation is exceeding anything in the historical baseline data. Researchers cross-referencing modern sensor data with Renaissance-era accounts from the months preceding the 1538 event discover a sequence repeating itself with a precision that defies coincidence. Gas emissions are climbing along the same coastal arcs where fishermen in the 1500s reported burning sulfur breaths rising from the sea. Shorelines are shifting in patterns that match the documented land recession observed mere weeks before Monte Novo violently erupted. Even the rhythm of ground uplift shows the same characteristic pattern. Slow, irregular pulses suddenly giving way to abrupt accelerations that stress the crust beyond its capacity to flex without breaking. The 1538 eruption created an entire mountain in 1 week of explosive violence, killed dozens, and permanently reshaped the landscape. Current monitoring data is now registering conditions that exceed those historical measurements, suggesting the system beneath Naples is entering a phase scientists desperately hoped never to witness in their lifetimes. As scientific reports documenting the escalating crisis circulate through government channels, Italy's Civil Protection Agency quietly escalates its emergency posture without public announcements that might trigger mass panic. Internal bulletins upgrade the regional alert matrix, instructing county-level offices to refresh evacuation models and emergency protocols that have not been seriously updated in years. Emergency sirens positioned throughout coastal towns undergo unannounced testing, their sudden wailing catching residents completely off guard and flooding municipal phone lines with panicked calls. Teachers in schools across Pozzuoli and Naples quietly rehearse updated exit procedures with students, carefully framing the drills as routine preparedness exercises rather than urgent emergency planning for imminent disaster. Street-level notices begin appearing on community boards throughout the affected zones, displaying new emergency assembly points, adjusted volcanic hazard boundaries, and revised traffic flow maps designed for potential mass evacuation scenarios involving hundreds of thousands of people fleeing simultaneously. Volcanologists analyzing seafloor data warn that if underground pressure continues building in the shallow hydrothermal zones beneath the bay, the first catastrophic breakout may not come from a visible crater on land. It could detonate directly under the water itself. A confined pulse of superheated steam could flash violently to life beneath the waves, driving an underwater blast capable of lifting a massive column of scalding water, volcanic ash, and shattered sediment straight into the air above densely populated shorelines. Computer models show that even a relatively modest hydrothermal burst could send destructive waves slamming into the nearest coastal areas within minutes, while simultaneously raining debris across active ports, crowded beaches, and residential neighborhoods packed with families. The danger is not necessarily the total scale of such an explosion. It is the brutal speed and devastating proximity. With fishing boats, passenger ferries, and thousands of waterfront homes sitting directly above geologically unstable ground, the impact window between initial eruption and catastrophic damage would be measured in minutes, not hours. Across every monitoring station tracking the crisis, scientists see all the critical variables moving together in the exact convergence pattern they have feared for decades. Ground uplift continues accelerating in irregular surges. Gas emission levels spike beyond all historical baselines. Seismic swarms ripple beneath multiple sectors of the caldera simultaneously. Patches of seawater heat toward boiling temperatures just meters below the surface. Individually, none of these warning signs absolutely guarantees an imminent eruption. Combined, they form the precise conditions that make a catastrophic failure increasingly likely with each passing day. Locals living on the caldera feel the tension rising beneath the official calm, noticing details the government refuses to publicly acknowledge. More patrol cars parked near monitoring stations. More helicopters scanning fumarole fields at dawn. More late-night emergency meetings in municipal buildings with no explanations offered to the families living in the danger zone. Campi Flegrei has remained dormant for 486 years, but every scientific indicator now suggests that the long silence is ending. The convergence of warning signs is unprecedented in the entire modern monitoring record. Scientists cannot predict the exact trigger or precise timeline, but the data is undeniable. The bubbling Bay of Naples is not just unusual activity. It is a geological system approaching the threshold that separates dormancy from catastrophic eruption.